September 21, 1972, an infamous day in Philippine history. President Ferdinand Marcos issued Proclamation 1081 declaring martial law all over the country. It was the beginning of a one-man rule that lasted until 1986. February 25, 1986 was our liberation when people power led by the president's mother, the late President Corazon Aquino, ousted the dictator. And 40 years later, we still remember that fateful day, and for every Filipino, never again to martial law. And joining us tonight are former Congressman Satur Ocampo of Bayan and his colleague, Congressman Teodoro Casiño. Good evening, sirs.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir. Sir, let's start with Satur. Sir, it's been 40 years since the declaration of martial law. What do you recall of that time? What was the atmosphere then when it was declared?
Well, I was a journalist at the time that martial law was declared, but I was at the same time part of the mass movement as a political activist, and our group was sort of prepared because there had been talks about martial law being declared, particularly by coming from Senator Aquino at the time. So when the actual declaration was made, and I was included in the list of journalists and others supposed for arrest, I was able to evade it. But martial law caught up with me 4 years after 1976.
So what lessons should we learn from martial law? Satur?
Again?
What lessons should we learn from martial law?
Lessons.
What lessons should be learned from what happened during martial law now 40 years after?
Yes, of course, the most important lesson is what the current call of almost everyone who had lived through that period, never again to martial law. Because it is a very difficult situation and very harsh conditions with Marcos having shut down Congress and issued decrees all by himself, presidential decrees, letters of instructions, administrative orders, executive orders that are all forming part of the law of the land. Clamp down on media immediately. Letter of instruction number 1 and number 2 were for the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Public Information, and really entitled at the time, to take control of all media facilities. So there were very strict regulations on the publication of news. No comments were allowed. So there was no outlet, no interaction between government and the people to the media.
Sir, do you think that martial law was necessary at that time? President Marcos said that communist insurgency and the Muslim rebellion in the South and rising activism pushed him to declare it. What's your opinion on this?
Marcos has claimed that the NPA at that time had already about 500 high-powered firearms. Was a lie, because the NPA was on the incipient period. There were, I think, really about 45 rifles that doesn't even constitute a company. But he blew that up and made a scenario saying that the left was in collaboration or with the, what they call the oligarchs, to take over government. So he said it was to save the republic and to reform society, he had to resort to the constitutional powers of the president to declare martial law.
And for Congressman Teodoro Casiño, I'd also like to pose the question, what lessons should we learn from martial law after 40 years?
Well, I think after 40 years, the lessons are clear. No? Definitely, we should not allow such a dictatorship to happen again, and that we should continually protect our rights, protect our freedoms. And I guess one lesson is that the legacies of martial law are still with us, and we still have to address these legacies. For example, just the issue of justice to the victims of martial law. Until now, Congress has still to pass the Marcos Compensation Act. And that's 40 years after the fact. That's more than 30 years after the end of the dictatorship, and yet we're still grappling with the issue of justice to the victims. So the lesson is that it is not that easy to do away with the vestiges of the dictatorship, and we have to continue the fight for freedom and democracy.
For Satur, how should we value our freedom? You were there during the declaration of martial law and you've experienced it. Now, after 40 years, how should we actually value our freedom right now for the younger generation? Satur?
The younger generation have very little, if any, concept of what really happened under martial rule. The defect was that our historians have been remiss in actually writing up a definitive account of how martial law was. We are getting feedbacks from certain sources that the textbooks being used by our elementary students put the period of martial law in favorable light, so nothing disturbs or attracts the attention of our young people in grade school. I think the Department of Education should be alerted to the fact that these textbooks need to be reviewed, and that there should be a corresponding revision or withdrawal of all those that misrepresent what really happened under martial law. Otherwise, the memory of martial law will remain among those who live through that area, and when they pass away, there will be nothing left for the new generation.
For Congressman Teddy, just a follow-up on this. Do you think that this should be part of the curriculum in schools? Would your colleagues actually pass this in Congress to be able for this curriculum to be taught to our students?
Well, definitely. I've seen some of the textbooks, and they provide a very sanitized version of martial law. In fact, one book I read even said that Marcos declared martial law to save the country from communism and Muslim secessionism. So it takes hook, line, and sinker the deception that Marcos foisted to justify martial rule. So I agree. We really have to review and to revisit and to revise these textbooks to simply to tell what actually happened and what the truth is. And I don't think we even need legislation for that. I think the Department of Education, the Commission on Higher Education can do that by themselves. They have a lot of discretion when it comes to contents of our textbooks and to the curriculum of our educational institutions.
So with regards to the compensation of the human rights victims, they're still unresolved 26 years after EDSA, and there's no clear indication from Congress that it will pass. What can be done to finally bring closure to this issue?
Well, actually, Congress, the lower house, has passed on third reading its version of the Marcos compensation bill. Now, the problem is with the Senate. We were told that yesterday they were supposed to discuss it in plenary, but the session was cut short because of the ongoing tiff between Senators Trillanes and Enrile. So the ball is in the Senate's court, and we are really hoping that when we resume session by October 7, this be among the priority bills that the Senate should act on.
Okay.
If I may add,
yes.
It is important for President Pinoy to certify the bill as urgent. Otherwise, Senate would take its time taking up the bill, and it may never be passed.
Satur, going back to the time of martial law in 1972, was it worth it going underground during the Marcos years? And what was your worst experience during this time?
Well, it was correct for me and several others to go underground because we were already ordered to be arrested under a long list read by then Information Secretary Kit Tatad. And it was also good because it gave me an opportunity to go back where I came where I came from the farmers of Central Luzon, and feel from them their reaction and opposition to martial rule. In fact, because of the abuses of the military and even the civil government, after the initial 3 years of relative calm, the revolutionary forces grew exponentially vis-a-vis the rate of abuses and the violations of human rights. It was bruited about then that Marcos was the biggest recruiter for the New People's Army, and it was that flow, that surge of the underground revolutionary movement, and subsequently the open mass movement that created the condition for the political isolation of Marcos that led later to bigger protest actions after the assassination of Ninoy Aquino. But without the previous long period of opposition, both of the underground and above ground, the outpouring after the Aquino assassination would have been that big if the people were not sufficiently alerted and agitated and motivated to overthrow the Marcos dictatorship.
Satur, how was it like living on a day-to-day basis? What was your life like back then?
In the underground?
How was it like during that time living on a day-to-day basis? What was it like for you then? How was life living during that time?
Well, because of the atmosphere of fear that was imposed, in the first 3 months or 3 years, there was relative peace and order. After the execution of Lim Seng or for supposed drug trafficking, that sent a message to criminal syndicates, private armies, when the call for surrender of firearms was made. The firearms were surrendered. So for a time, many people thought that martial law was good. Maybe that provides the reason for Secretary Enrile, or now Senate President Enrile, to say that it was okay to have declared martial law, but it should have been lifted in 1973. So he was thinking it should be only for 1 year. He said, masyadong tumagal. So, and sa masyadong tumagal period, the abuses, the corruption, then the human rights violations, that really made it worse for the lives of the Filipino people until Marcos was overthrown.
Okay, Congressman Teddy, you were very young when martial law was proclaimed. What inspired you to be active in leading mass actions and protests in a post-Marcos era?
Well, I was a martial law baby for all intents and purposes. I was born in 1968. So I took part in the anti-dictatorship movement at the later half. After the Ninoy assassination, I was in second year high school. And that started my political awakening. The last few years of the anti-Marcos dictatorship struggle. So I took part in the rallies, the demonstrations, the confetti rallies at Ayala, also the snap elections. I volunteered for NAMFREL. And for me, it was really history in the making, and it opened my eyes to a lot of political and social realities, and that eventually the 1986 EDSA People Uprising inspired me to take the path where I am today. I became a full-time activist. I worked with marginalized sectors, with communities in asserting their rights and their welfare. And this has given me a lot of experience, a lot of insight, which I am able to use effectively as a party list representative in Congress.
Was it very difficult, sir, to participate in this movement, having to do it underground during that time?
Well, it wasn't. I wasn't underground at all. No, at that time, after the Ninoy Aquino assassination, rallies and demonstrations were really out in the open. There was a lot of freedom. People were able to assert their right to expression, their right to express outrage against the dictatorship, and there was no stopping at that point. The dictatorship could not stop the people. So I did not, unlike Satur, who had really to go underground, I did not have that, there was no compulsion for me to go underground. And so I actually benefited from all the efforts, from all the sacrifices that people like Satur and those who went underground did during the martial law days.
And a final word from you, sirs. Let's start with you, Congressman Teddy.
Well, I hope that 40 years after martial law, we have finally learned our lessons. But many things, many more things have to be done to ensure that indeed martial law will never be repeated, and that the victims of martial law will be given the justice that they have longed for so many years.
Satur, final words.
The lessons of martial law was not that the ouster of Marcos was not sufficient. What should have been followed through was former President Corazon Aquino's declaration that our government would be the exact opposite of the Marcos dictatorship. She did not do that. In the first place, she adopted in entirety the armed forces of the Philippines, together with former Defense Secretary was Juan Ponce Enrile, and made Fidel Ramos the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces. The two were the key implementers of martial law. The whole defense and military structure was adopted by the new government. So all of the policies that were carried out in the counterinsurgency campaign, in the handling of people, in the martial law mindset of the military, was carried forward to the Aquino government, to the next Ramos government, Estrada, Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo, until the present period. No investigation, no prosecution was made for those guilty of human rights violation and other crimes. So the impunity has allowed the continuation of the killings, the disappearances, and the very atmosphere. What people say, the bad legacies of martial law, even pro-Marcos are saying there are some good legacies of martial law. But these have to be definitively pointed out, and there has to be a reckoning for all those responsible under martial law, so that it would not be continuously repeated under every new administration.
Okay, on that note, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us tonight on NewsLive. That was Satur Ocampo and Congressman Teodoro Casiño, both of Bayan Muna.